Welcome to Fear Spiral, where the ordinary becomes terrifying and the shadows you ignore may be watching. Here, we bring you real encounters that chill the bone, true stories told by people who lived to regret it. Or didn't. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself. Because what you're about to hear will haunt your thoughts long after the video ends. Tonight, we take you on a journey through 10 terrifying true encounter stories of shadowy figures, abandoned roads, and places you'd never dare to be alone. Each tale is told in first person, as if the horror happened to you. From the man who waits at your window, to the hitchhiker that shouldn't exist, to the forest that watches your every step. These stories are designed to make your heart race and your skin crawl. So settle in, because the night is long, the darkness is heavy, and the fear is real. Stay with us, if you dare. The man at my window. I live alone in a modest third-floor apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I'm 24, work the late shift at a diner downtown, and usually get home around 1:30 a.m. It's a routine I've grown used to, and honestly, I don't mind it. I like the solitude, but that night, everything changed. I got home around 2:05 a.m., tired and stiff from standing all night, carrying the lingering smell of fried onions and coffee with me. The streets were unusually silent. Usually I hear cars passing or the occasional late-night jogger, but that night the city felt hollow. Even the stray cats were gone. I shrugged it off, locking the door behind me, and headed to the kitchen. For a glass of water, that's when I saw it, a movement in the living room window. My apartment is on the 3rd floor. The only way anyone could be there is by the fire escape. My pulse shot up immediately. I froze, staring at the window. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight, my reflection distorting in the glass, but then I saw the outline of a man, standing perfectly still on the fire escape. My stomach dropped. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice trembled. No response. The man didn't move except for a faint rise and fall of his shoulders, like he was breathing slowly. I squinted, trying to get a better look. Moonlight hit his face just enough for me to see his eyes, wide and unblinking. He had this blank, unnerving stare that seemed to pierce straight through me. I felt my legs weaken. I backed away, considering calling the police, but I also feared that if I made any sudden moves, he might react. My mind raced. Who was this? What did he want? I quietly grabbed my phone and dialed 911. While it rang, he tapped lightly on the glass, and I swear I felt the vibrations through the floor. I'm calling the police," I stammered. "Stay there." He didn't move. Then, as if sensing the phone call, he slowly lowered his hand and disappeared from view. I was frozen, heart hammering, barely breathing. I approached the window cautiously. The fire escape was empty. I checked the street below. Nothing. No footprints, no shadows. Just the quiet street and my own shaky breathing. I tried to calm myself and settled into bed around 3 a.m., thinking maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it had been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But then I heard it. Soft, deliberate. Tapping coming from my bedroom window. My heart leaped into my throat. I sat up, holding my breath. The tapping repeated, slow and measured. My bedroom is at the far end of the apartment. Whoever was outside had to be mobile, climbing the exterior, moving without making a sound. I grabbed my phone, shined the flashlight through the curtains, and there was nothing. I blinked. The street below was empty. Nothing on the fire escape. My heart felt like it would burst. I tried to tell myself it was a branch hitting the window, the wind. But deep down, I knew it was send single quotes d dot, and then my phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number. I opened it, trembling. A photo. Me, in bed. Sleeping. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. I live on the 3rd floor. There's no possible way anyone could have taken that picture. My vision blurred. My hands shook. I didn't even realize I was crying. I packed a bag immediately, grabbing clothes, my laptop, and my wallet. I called the police while walking to my car, still shaking uncontrollably. When they came to inspect my apartment, they found no signs of forced entry. The fire escape had no footprints. The window locks were intact. Nothing, I tried to explain. The photo and the tapping sounds, but they looked at me with that mix of sympathy and disbelief. I stayed in a motel that night. Every creak of the walls, every distant car horn set my nerves on edge. I couldn't sleep. Around 4:30 a.m., I thought. I heard the same soft tapping like fingernails, lightly hitting glass. I bolted upright, but it was gone. I never saw him again. At least not physically. Months later, I still get chills when I think about it. And sometimes at night, when I'm alone, I hear the faintest tapping on glass. And I can't help but glance toward the window, my heart skipping a beat. Who he was, or why he chose me, I'll never know. And sometimes, I wonder if I ever really left that apartment at all. The road that disappeared in 26, and usually avoid driving the old highway through Pinewood Woods after dark. But that night, I got a call from a friend around 11:30 p.m., insisting I join him at a small get-together in town. I didn't want to go, but eventually relented. By the time I left, it was 1:15 a.m. The night was unusually foggy. The kind of fog that hugs the trees and seeps into your clothes. The world seemed muffled, the usual nighttime sounds, distant cars, the hum of streetlights swallowed by the mist. I drove slowly, telling myself it was safer that way. After about 20 minutes, I realized something was wrong. The familiar bends and markers on the highway weren't there. I had driven this route dozens of times. I knew every curve, every mile marker. Now it felt wrong. My GPS had no signal, which was odd for this area. My stomach knotted. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing, just fog and dark trees. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. My headlights cut through the fog just enough to reveal it a man, tall and thin, completely motionless. I slammed on the brakes, my chest pounding. The figure raised an arm, pointing to a turn I didn't recognize. Panic tightened in my chest. I tried reversing, but the road behind me seemed to vanish, swallowed by the fog and trees pressed impossibly close. I swallowed hard. My mind screamed that this wasn't real, but my eyes told me it was. I carefully edged past him. The figure didn't move, just tilted its head, staring without expression. And then I saw the face, featureless, smooth, pale, like a mask with no eyes, nose, or mouth. I screamed, swerving slightly, heart thundering, vision blurred by tears. I floored the accelerator and drove as fast as I dared. The fog thickened. The trees seemed to lean closer, branches scratching at the sides of my car. Every so often, I thought I saw more figures in the mist, lurking just at the edge of my headlights. My chest burned from fear, hands numb from gripping the wheel, mind racing. Eventually, the fog lifted, and the familiar signs of the highway appeared. I swerved onto the main road, breathing heavily, sweat cold on my back. I didn't stop driving for another hour, even though my body begged me to. When I finally got home around 3:30 a.m., I locked every door and window. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept seeing that featureless face, that unblinking stare. Days later, I checked online for any reports of disappearances or strange sightings on that highway. Nothing. No one mentioned the fog, the featureless figure, or the road vanishing into nothing. Sometimes when I drive at night, I swear I can feel the fog creeping back, like it's alive, like it's waiting for me to make a wrong turn. And sometimes, late at night, I see a figure in the corner of my eye just standing there, Waiting, watching, like it knows I'll return one day. I still don't know what I encountered. All I know is that the road disappeared, and whatever was on it, it wanted me to see it. The Cabin in the Woods. I'm 28, work as a freelance photographer, and sometimes I go on solo trips to clear my mind and find inspiration. In late November, I decided to take a weekend off and head into the mountains about 3 hours outside the city. I found a small rustic cabin listed online, nothing fancy, just enough to escape the noise of the city. I arrived around 5:30 p.m., just as the sun was starting to dip behind the tall pine trees, casting long, twisted shadows over the dirt road. The cabin was exactly as described, old but solid, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and a lofted bedroom. I unpacked my bag and set up my camera equipment by the living room window, eager to capture the sunset through the trees. There was a faint chill in the air, the kind that seeps through clothing and sits in your bones, and I lit the fireplace to warm the room. I felt a strange satisfaction in being alone. No responsibilities, no one around, just the quiet rustle of the forest. After dinner, I settled on the couch with a notebook to jot down some thoughts. The forest was dark now, the only illumination coming from the fireplace and my lantern. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard the faintest crunch of footsteps on gravel outside. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or a stray fox. But the sound was deliberate, slow, measured, not random. I froze, straining my ears. The steps circled the cabin, stopping at intervals, then resuming. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. My stomach clenched, and I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a neighbor? The cabin listing said this was private land, but maybe someone else rented a nearby cabin. I told myself it was fine, that it was nothing, but the footsteps continued, pacing the perimeter in a deliberate pattern. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly opened the door. The night air hit me, colder than I expected, and carried the scent of wet pine and damp earth. The gravel was undisturbed. No footprints. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I called out again, louder this time. "Who's there?" Silence. I returned inside, locked the door, and double-checked the windows. Everything seemed normal. But then, from the loft bedroom above me, I heard its soft creaking, like someone walking across the wooden floor. My loft was empty. I hadn't heard any footsteps coming up the stairs, and the cabin had been locked since I arrived. I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight in hand, trying to convince myself it was the old wood settling. But the sound wasn't consistent with settling. It was deliberate, slow, almost like someone testing their footing. I reached the top of the stairs. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, even though I remembered closing it. My hand shook as I pushed it open. Nothing, just the loft, my bag, and the faint smell of wood smoke. I stayed up for hours after that, sitting on the edge of the bed listening to every creak and whistle of wind through the trees. Around 2:15 a.m., I dozed off, curled under the blankets. That's when I woke to a whisper. Soft, clear, right next to my ear. "Why are you here?" I bolted upright, heart hammering, and the loft was empty. I turned on my flashlight, scanning every corner. Shadows stretched across the walls, flickering with the firelight. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I whispered, "Who's there?" The only response was silence, and the faint sound of something shuffling across the main floor below me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but there was no signal. The nearest town was miles away, and my GPS was useless here. My only option was to stay calm and wait until morning. I moved to the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone outside, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the porch. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. Around 3:30 a.m., I finally heard it, knocking, slow, deliberate, at the front door. I froze. The knocking continued, methodical, almost impatient. I wanted to call out, to demand they leave, but my voice caught in my throat. The knocking stopped. A second later, a shadow moved across the living room wall. Not through the window inside the cabin. I could see it clearly now, though just barely illuminated by the fireplace. A tall, thin figure, its face obscured by a hood, standing near the doorway. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I whispered, shaking, "Go away." The figure didn't move. Then slowly it lifted a hand. I saw something in its grip, a small weathered knife. My stomach dropped. I backed away, tripping over a rug. The knife glinted in the firelight. I didn't think. I ran out the back door, stumbling over rocks and branches into the thick, freezing forest. The wind cut at my face, and the smell of damp pine filled my nostrils. I ran without direction, hearing the faint crunch of footsteps behind me, always just out of sight. My lungs burned, legs screaming, but the fear kept me moving. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I stumbled onto the dirt road leading back to the main highway. My car was still parked where I'd left it. I jumped in, locked the doors, and didn't stop driving until I was back in town. I've never gone back to that cabin. I've tried rationalizing what happened. Maybe it was a trespasser. Maybe my imagination. But the footprints, the whispers, the knife, none of it makes sense. And sometimes when I'm home alone, I swear I can hear slow, measured footsteps circling the edges of my apartment, like someone waiting, just outside, watching. I don't know who or what was in that cabin, but I know I wasn't alone, and I still carry the memory of that silent figure and its hooded face every time I close my eyes. The apartment above. I'm 27, and I recently moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment in an older building downtown. It's not fancy, but it's cheap, and I liked that it was close to work and a few late-night convenience stores. The building has a reputation for being quiet, mostly older tenants who keep to themselves. I moved in on a chilly November evening, around 6 p.m., carrying boxes up the narrow staircase. My apartment is on the first floor, and above me is an empty unit, or so I thought. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked, decorated, and got used to the creaks and groans of the old building. Around 2 a.m. on the third night, though, I was woken by a loud thump. At first, I assumed it was the usual settling of the building, or maybe a neighbor moving furniture, but it was too deliberate to be random. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening. The thump was followed by a slow scrape, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the apartment above is finally getting a tenant, I muttered to myself. But when I checked the lease information, the unit above me had been vacant for months. I felt a prickle of unease, but I shook it off, telling myself I was just tired. Over the next few nights, the sounds continued. Always around 2 o'clock to 2:30 a.m. Heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. Soft scraping, even occasional whispers I couldn't quite make out. I started recording it on my phone just to prove to myself I wasn't imagining things. The whispers were faint, almost melodic, but entirely unintelligible. I would lie awake, listening, feeling the floor vibrate beneath my feet. One night, around 2:15 a.m., I decided to confront it. I climbed the creaky stairs to the empty apartment, flashlight in hand. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, but otherwise, it seemed normal. I knocked on the door. No answer. I tried the doorknob. It was locked. I knocked again, louder this time. "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice echoed in the empty hallway. Nothing. I leaned closer to the door, pressing my ear against it, and I heard it. The sound of footsteps pacing directly above me. But they weren't normal footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, almost in sync with my own heartbeat. A shiver ran down my spine. I stepped back and almost tripped over the hallway rug, heart racing. I returned to my apartment, trying to ignore it, but the next sound made me freeze in terror. A low, guttural moan came through the ceiling, barely audible but chilling. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I grabbed my phone and recorded it again. I played it back during the day, but the sound was faint, distorted, almost like static. The following night I stayed up, waiting. Around 2:05 a.m., I heard a scratching at the ceiling above my bed. My breath caught. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was more like nails dragging across the plaster, moving slowly toward the center of the room. My mind raced. Maybe it was a raccoon or some other animal trapped in the walls. But the scratching stopped when I turned on the light, as if aware I was watching. I stayed in bed wide-eyed, listening as the silence pressed in. Then, faintly, I heard breathing, slow, heavy, directly above me. Not from the vents, not from the walls, but somewhere in the apartment above. My hands shook. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the sound of that slow, deliberate breathing. I couldn't sleep. My apartment, which had felt safe and quiet, now seemed oppressive. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind rattling the windows, made me jump. Around 2:30 a.m., I thought I heard something fall upstairs. A loud crash, like furniture hitting the floor. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? Someone is living in an empty apartment above me and pacing? The next evening, I decided to investigate further. I knocked on my neighbor's door, a kind, older woman who lived across the hall. She looked startled. "You hear noises upstairs too?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Her eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "That apartment's been empty for months." My stomach sank. "Then who or what has been making all the noise?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Some people say the building's haunted, but I wouldn't worry too much." I didn't sleep that night. Around 2:20 a.m., the footsteps started again. Slow, pacing, coming closer right above my bed. I could hear it clearly now, the dragging, scraping, and occasional thump. I pulled the blankets over my head, my body trembling, heart hammering. Then I heard something I will never forget. A voice. Low, raspy, and almost a whisper. It called my name. "Come upstairs." I bolted upright, panic choking me. I couldn't see anything above, but the voice sounded like it was right in my room. My head spun. I grabbed my jacket, phone, and wallet and ran. I didn't look back. I went to a 24-hour diner nearby and stayed there until sunrise, too afraid to return. By mid-morning, I convinced myself to go back. My apartment was empty, exactly as I'd left it. No sign of anyone upstairs. But the atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavy, thick, like something had lingered there. I noticed faint scratches along the ceiling, tiny marks I was sure hadn't been there before. I packed a few essentials and stayed at a friend's place that night. I didn't go back for over a week. When I finally returned, I found a note slipped under my door. "You shouldn't have ignored us." No signature. Number. Explanation. I moved out immediately. I still think about that apartment. Sometimes when I stay in hotels or new places, I get that same feeling, the slow pacing, the deliberate scratches, the soft whisper in the dead of night calling my name, and I wonder, if I hadn't moved out, would they have come for me? I'll never know, but I know that the apartment above wasn't empty. Whatever was there, it wasn't human, and it knew I was listening. The stranger on the highway. I'm 29, a long-haul truck driver, used to driving late at night alone across empty highways. I usually enjoy the quiet, the rhythm of the road at 2 or 3 a.m. when most people are asleep. But one November night, around 2:20 a.m., I had an encounter that I still can't explain. I was hauling a small load from a distribution center about 200 miles out of town. The highway was mostly empty, just the occasional dim streetlight cutting through the blackness. It was cold, and the windshield had a thin layer of frost forming along the edges, which I scraped off before continuing. My coffee had gone cold, and I could hear the faint hum of the tires on asphalt. Nothing unusual. Or so I thought. I was nearing a stretch of highway that cuts through a dense forest, a part I've driven hundreds of times. My headlights illuminated the road ahead, the tall pine trees looming like silent sentinels. Around 2:30 a.m., I saw a figure walking along the side of the road, almost blending into the dark shadows of the trees. A man, tall, wearing a dark coat, walking slowly in the middle of the lane. My first thought was that he might be drunk, or stranded. I slowed down and rolled the window down a little. "Hey, you need a ride?" I called out, but he didn't respond. Not a word, not even a glance. He just kept walking toward my truck as if he didn't even see me. My chest tightened. Something about the way he moved felt wrong, mechanical, stiff. Not like a normal person. I glanced at my rearview mirror. No cars behind me, no lights. It was just me and him. I considered stopping, but a shiver ran down my spine. There was something off. I can't explain it, but I felt like he was studying me, even though he never looked directly at me. Then he did something that made my stomach drop. He raised his hand slowly, not to wave, not to stop me, but to point directly at my truck. At me, a deliberate, unnatural motion. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, my heart hammering in my chest. The tires squealed slightly, and I felt the truck lurch forward. I didn't look back. For the next 10 minutes, everything seemed normal. The headlights cutting through the forest fog. I thought I'd lost him. My chest began to unclench slightly, but the tension remained. Then, out of nowhere, I caught him in my peripheral vision running alongside the truck. I swerved, staring in disbelief. A man running at impossible speed, keeping pace with my fully loaded 18-wheeler. I yanked the wheel to the side, tires screeching, swerving onto the shoulder. My heart felt like it would explode. I slammed on the brakes, shaking, and he stopped. Just stood there on the side of the road, perfectly still. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel it. That same unnatural, unblinking stare I'd noticed. Before, I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a hallucination, maybe exhaustion, maybe hypothermia from the cold night. But then the most terrifying thing happened. He started walking again, toward me. And as he walked, the road behind him seemed to warp. The trees blurred at the edges, and for a split second, I swore I saw the road stretch and disappear into darkness, like the world behind him was being erased. Panic overtook every rational thought. I threw the truck into gear and sped away, tires rattling, engine screaming. I didn't dare look in the mirrors. After about 5 minutes, the figure vanished, just gone. No trace, no shadow, nothing. The road returned to normal, the trees standing solid and familiar. I pulled into the next rest stop around 3:15 a.m., shaking so hard I could barely climb down from the cab. I called a friend, trying to explain what happened, but the words sounded ridiculous even as I said them. He laughed it off, assuming I was tired or overworked. But I knew what I saw. And the feeling of being watched, the weight of that unblinking stare has never left me. I slept in the rest stop parking lot, eyes wide, listening to the distant hum of trucks and the occasional car. I didn't see him again. But sometimes, even now when I drive at night, I swear I see a dark figure at the edge of the forest, just standing, just watching, pointing silently. I've tried to rationalize it for weeks. Maybe it was a hitchhiker, maybe it was a reflection. But no human could have kept pace with my truck or made the road vanish like that. No one. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the next person to drive alone in the dead of night, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for me to look back. Even now, months later, whenever I drive the highway at night, I feel his presence. I see movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark shadow flitting between the trees. My hands tighten on the wheel, my breath quickens, and I find myself gripping the horn, forcing myself to move forward, hoping I don't meet him again. I haven't driven that stretch alone since. I take the long detour through the city, through lights, through people, anything to avoid the stretch of road that disappeared that night. But no matter how far I go, I can't shake the memory of his slow, deliberate steps, or the way the highway seemed to bend and vanish behind him. I can't shake the feeling that he isn't done, and that if I ever take that road again, he'll be waiting. The late-night guest. I'm 26 and work as a software developer. Most of my evenings are spent alone in my small apartment downtown. I enjoy the solitude, but sometimes it makes the city feel too quiet, too empty. One late November night, I had an experience that changed how I felt about being alone forever. It was around 11:45 p.m. when I got home from a late work session. The streets were deserted, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums. I fumbled with my keys in the cold, finally unlocking the door and stepping inside. My apartment smelled faintly of the leftover dinner I hadn't finished, the microwave still humming in the kitchen. I dropped my bag and flicked on the lights. Everything seemed normal. I made a cup of tea, then sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. Around 12:30 a.m., I heard it, a faint knock at my door. My heart jumped. I live alone. No one ever knocks this late. I froze, listening carefully. It wasn't a single knock. It was a slow, deliberate pattern, almost rhythmic. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Pause. 3 again. I whispered, "Who is it?" But no answer came. My rational brain tried to explain it. Maybe a neighbor mistakenly thought this was their apartment. But the knocking continued, persistent, deliberate. My pulse quickened. I debated calling the police, but something made me hesitate. It didn't feel like an ordinary person was outside. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by the flickering fluorescent lights. No one. I exhaled, slowly, telling myself it was the wind or some building quirk. But the knocking had stopped. Relieved, I returned to the couch, trying to calm my nerves. Around 1:10 a.m., I was drifting toward sleep when I heard it again, this time, footsteps inside my apartment. Slow, deliberate, pacing from the living room toward the kitchen. My heart raced. I live alone. I don't have pets. The footsteps were unmistakably human. I froze, gripping the blanket over my lap. "Who's there?" I called out, voice trembling. No answer. The footsteps stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the apartment. I could feel my pulse in my ears, every nerve on edge. Then I heard it, the faint creak of the bedroom door behind me opening. I jumped to my feet and grabbed the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty bedroom. Nothing. My mind screamed at me to leave, to get out of there immediately, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Then I noticed something on the bed, a single damp handprint on the blanket. I hadn't touched the blanket since I sat down. My stomach turned to ice. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and whispered my address to the operator. As I waited, I heard the faint sound of breathing, slow, heavy, coming from the living room. I shined the flashlight in that direction. The beam caught a figure standing just past the doorway, shrouded in shadow. It was tall, with long, thin limbs, completely still. I froze, too terrified to move. And then it did something that made my blood run cold. It tilted its head toward me. Not in curiosity, not like a person would, but in a deliberate, unnatural way. Its face was obscured by shadow, but I could feel its gaze, as if it were studying me. "Leave," I whispered, voice shaking. The figure didn't move. Then slowly it raised a hand. Not threateningly, but almost ceremoniously, as if pointing to me, marking me. I felt a cold sweat break out across my body, my chest tightening painfully. I backed away, tripping over the rug, falling to the floor. Scrambled to the door, yanking it open, and bolted into the hallway. I didn't look back. I ran down the stairs, slipping slightly on the steps, heart hammering, lungs burning. I made it to the street and kept running until I reached a convenience store a few blocks away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pay the cashier for a coffee. I stayed there until sunrise, unable to go back. When I returned to the apartment, everything was normal. No broken locks, no sign of forced entry. The handprint was gone. The flashlight had been knocked over, but that could have been me in my panic. The police came and checked, but they found nothing. No one had been inside. I moved out immediately after that. But the experience left a lasting impact. Even now, whenever I'm home alone at night, I feel it, the presence of someone just beyond my vision, watching, waiting. I sometimes wake up around 2 a.m. and swear I hear faint knocks or the slow creak of a door. Months later, I received a text from an unknown number. "Why did you leave?" I haven't replied. And I don't plan to. The motel room across the hall. I'm 30, work as a traveling consultant, and I spend a lot of nights in motels alone. I've grown used to the routine checking in, unpacking, sleeping, and leaving early the next morning. But one night in late November, I stayed somewhere I'll never forget. I arrived at a small, nondescript motel just off Highway 47 around 11:15 p.m. The neon sign flickered, buzzing faintly, and the cold wind rattled the trees around the parking lot. The office smelled of bleach and stale coffee. I paid for a single night, got my key to room 12, and headed down the dimly lit corridor. The carpet smelled faintly of mold, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed intermittently. I unlocked the door, stepped in, and let out a sigh. The room was clean but basic: bed, dresser, bathroom. I set my bag down, stripped off my coat, and turned on the TV, hoping to drown out the silence. I didn't realize the room across the hall, room 11, was already occupied. Around 1 a.m., I heard a soft knock not at my door, but faint, coming from the other side of the wall. At first I ignored it, thinking maybe someone had dropped something, but the knock repeated, slow, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, then 3 again. I froze. The pattern was too deliberate to be accidental. Curious and unnerved, I pressed my ear to the wall. I thought I might hear someone moving inside the room across the hall, but there was only silence. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the walls were thin. Maybe my imagination was running wild. Around 1:45 a.m., I got up to grab some water from the mini fridge. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper. "Hello." I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound came from room 11. I called out, my voice shaking. "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer, only silence. My mind raced. Why would someone be whispering in a motel room across the hall in the middle of the night? I decided to lie down and try to ignore it. Around 2:10 a.m., I thought I heard the faintest sound of a door opening and closing, the soft click of a lock. But I didn't move. I stayed frozen under the blanket, straining to hear. The whispers started again, just audible, curling through the thin walls. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, methodical, pacing back and forth. It wasn't a person walking casually. It was deliberate, almost ceremonial. My heart raced. I considered calling the front desk, but I hesitated. What would I even say? Someone in the room across from me is pacing and whispering. It sounded insane. At around 2:25 a.m., I decided to check the peephole. The hallway outside was empty, quiet and dimly lit, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow moving across the wall of room 11. Not a normal shadow, too fluid, too fast. It darted from the door to the corner like it knew I was watching. I jumped back, fumbling for my phone. I called 911, whispering my location. The operator asked me to stay calm and stay inside. I sat in bed, flashlight trembling in my hands, staring at the wall that separated me from that room. I could hear breathing now, slow, deliberate, in rhythm, with my own heartbeat. At 2:35 a.m., it happened. The room across the hall went completely silent. Too silent. Not a single creak, knock, or whisper. The silence was oppressive. I waited, holding my breath. Then, faintly, a single knock came at my door. One knock. I screamed. Not out loud, but internally. My hands shook as I backed into the corner. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The knocking continued, soft and rhythmic, moving from my door to the other side of the room. It wasn't just knocking. It sounded like something was tapping on the walls from the inside. Panic overtook me. I grabbed my keys, jacket, and phone and bolted down the hallway. I didn't look at room 11. I didn't want to. I ran straight to my car, doors locked, engine on, and drove away into the cold, empty highway. I didn't stop until I reached a 24-hour gas station 15 minutes away. Even there, the dread didn't leave. My phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. A text, "You should have stayed." I didn't reply. I stayed awake until sunrise, parked in the lot of the gas station, watching the road, hyper-aware of every sound. I haven't stayed in a motel alone since. Sometimes when I drive late at night, I think about that room across the hall. I wonder if the occupant, or whatever it was, is still there, waiting for the next traveler. Waiting for the sound of a door unlocking, the creak of a floorboard, the soft footsteps of someone who thinks they're alone. The strangest part? When I called the motel a few days later, the receptionist said room 11 had been empty for months. Still don't know what I encountered that night. And I don't think I ever want to. The basement below. I'm 32 and recently bought an old townhouse in a quiet part of the city. The building had character-high ceilings, creaky floorboards, and a basement that had clearly been unused for years. I'm usually not the superstitious type, but I've always been a little wary of basements. Still, it was my townhouse, and I planned to renovate it. I moved in at the end of November, just as the days were growing short and nights were creeping in earlier. The first evening, around 8 p.m., I decided to check out the basement. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, flashlight in hand. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the beam. The basement smelled musty, like old wood and damp concrete. Nothing unusual, except that I had the feeling I wasn't alone. I shook it off, attributing it to nerves, and started inspecting the walls. Around 11:30 p.m., I went back downstairs to retrieve some tools I had forgotten. That's when I heard it, the faintest whisper, barely audible, coming from the far corner of the basement. I froze. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the bare walls. Nothing. I took a step closer, flashlight cutting through the shadows. The whispering stopped immediately. My heart pounded. I convinced myself it was the wind moving through cracks in the foundation. I went back upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. I tried to sleep, but around 1:45 a.m., I was awakened by creaking. Slow, deliberate creaks from below. My pulse spiked. The sound was unmistakably footsteps, heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth. My mind raced. I live alone. I don't have pets. And there's no one else in the house. I grabbed my phone and flashlight, considering calling the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? Someone is pacing in my basement, but I live alone? They'd think I was crazy. I decided to investigate myself that I slowly descended the stairs. The air grew colder the further I went down. My breath was visible in the beam of my flashlight. The basement felt alive, oppressive. I swept the light across the empty room. Nothing. No figure, no intruder. Just shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. Then I noticed the stairs. The steps behind me, the ones I had just descended, were wet. Not water, something sticky, almost like condensation, but thicker. My stomach churned. I stepped back, flashlight trembling in my hands. That's when I heard it. A soft, deliberate whisper directly behind me. Leave. Now. I spun around. Nothing. The basement was empty. My chest tightened, sweat breaking out across my forehead. I fumbled for my phone, and the beam from the flashlight shook violently in my hands. I felt a cold draft, though all the windows were shut. The air smelled faintly of decay, like something had died down here. I decided to leave immediately, climbing the stairs as fast as I could. As I reached the top, the basement door slammed shut behind me, as if something had pushed it. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. My heart was racing so hard I thought it might burst. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it was the old house settling, maybe my mind playing tricks. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched. That whispering voice had been deliberate, targeted. That night I slept with every door locked and all lights on. Around 2:30 a.m., I thought I heard faint scratching, not on the floors, but from the ceiling above. My walls groaned, and I kept imagining footsteps moving just out of sight. Sleep did not come. The next morning, I went down to check the basement. Everything appeared normal. No wet spots on the stairs, no signs of intrusion, no marks on the floor. The air smelled musty but otherwise ordinary. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was the stress of moving and exhaustion, but the strange occurrences continued. Every night, around 1:30 to 2:30 a.m., I would hear the pacing, the whispering, the creaks from the basement. Sometimes it was accompanied by scratching, sometimes a faint knocking, almost like something trying to communicate. I never saw anything, but the presence was undeniable. One night, around 2:05 a.m., I was lying in bed when I saw it, a shadow moving across the basement door. Not through the peephole, not on the floorboards above, but a dark, humanoid shape that shifted unnaturally. I froze, paralyzed with fear. It didn't move like a person, but it seemed deliberate, aware of me. I grabbed my phone and flashlight, fully intending to leave. The door creaked as I approached, and I could hear the softest whisper. You shouldn't have come back. I didn't stay to see more. I fled the house, driving into the night, parked at a 24-hour diner, and called friends to come and help me retrieve my belongings safely. Even then, I avoided the basement entirely. I've never returned at night. I've considered selling the townhouse, but even thinking about it makes my skin crawl. The worst part is the ambiguity. Whatever is in that basement isn't human, or it doesn't act like one. I've tried explaining it, rationalizing it, ignoring it, but I can still hear that faint whisper in the back of my mind, especially when I'm alone. Late at night. Sometimes I dream of descending those stairs again. And every time I hear the same voice, slow and deliberate, whispering, "Come back." And I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, grateful that the basement is behind me for now. The hitchhiker on the rainy road. I'm 31, and I work in IT, so I spend most of my days inside staring at screens. Every now and then, I take weekend trips to clear my head. Late November seemed perfect for a solo drive along the back roads of my state, especially with the quiet rain creating a peaceful rhythm on the windshield. I left around 10:30 p.m. Driving a winding road far from the main highway. It was raining steadily by the time I reached a particularly desolate stretch, trees lining both sides of the road. Fog rolling in low, headlights barely cutting through the mist. The asphalt was slick, the smell of wet leaves heavy in the air. Around 11:50 p.m., I saw a figure on the side of the road, a person standing in the rain, thumb out. A hitchhiker. Normally, I wouldn't pick up strangers, especially at night, but something about the figure gave me pause. I slowed, rolling the window down slightly. They were wearing a dark hoodie, soaked from the rain, and their face was obscured by shadows. Need a ride? I asked cautiously. The figure nodded, stepping toward the car. I unlocked the passenger door, and they climbed in silently. Their presence was heavy, almost suffocating, and the smell hit me immediately. Wet earth, something metallic, like rust. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road. We drove in silence. I tried small talk. Where are you headed? No answer. Just the sound of the windshield wipers slicing through the rain. The silence was unnerving, and I noticed that the rearview mirror reflected only darkness, no passenger. I turned to glance at them. Their face was pale. So pale it looked almost luminous under the streetlights. Their eyes were dark, unnervingly so, and they didn't blink. I blinked once, twice, thinking that was a trick of the rain. But the stare didn't break. Are you okay? I asked, voice trembling slightly. Still nothing. Just that unblinking stare. My chest tightened, and I felt a chill despite the heater blasting. The rain seemed to intensify, drumming on the roof like a warning. My heart pounded. I considered stopping the car, asking them to get out, but something in my gut told me not to, like moving too quickly would provoke them. Around 12:15 a.m., I noticed something even more disturbing. The reflection in the mirror, their mouth wasn't moving, but I heard whispers. Faint at first, unintelligible, like someone speaking underwater. The sound was coming from inside the car, surrounding me. I pressed the gas pedal, heart racing. The whispers grew louder, urgent, almost hissing. Then the car lights flickered. The road ahead seemed to bend unnaturally, the trees stretching and twisting like long shadows. My stomach churned. I slammed on the brakes, and the hitchhiker leaned forward slowly, just inches from my face. Their eyes, black, endless voids, stared into mine, and I felt a weight pressing against my chest. I stumbled backward, fumbling for the door. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. I didn't dare speak. The whispering had stopped. Only silence and the relentless rain. I took a deep breath and stepped on the gas, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. After a few minutes of blind, panicked driving, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The passenger seat was empty. No sign they had ever been there. The metallic smell lingered in the car, faint but unmistakable. I pulled into the nearest gas station around 12:50 a.m., heart hammering, hands trembling. I called a friend, trying to explain what had happened. They laughed at first, assuming it was the long drive and rain playing tricks on me. But the fear in my voice made them pause. I stayed at the gas station until sunrise, too afraid to continue my drive. When I returned home, I cleaned the car thoroughly. The smell was mostly gone, but sometimes when it rains, I swear I can still smell that metallic, earthy scent. And sometimes, late at night, I see a shadow in the corner of the car. Just beyond the rearview mirror, a dark, still figure waiting silently. I haven't picked up another hitchhiker since. And I avoid that road whenever it rains, because I know that figure is still out there, waiting for the next lonely driver, the next person to slow down, the next victim who won't notice the unnatural stare until it's too late, even now. Months later, when I drive at night in my city, the rearview mirror catches a glimpse of darkness, just out of focus. My pulse quickens, my hands grip the wheel tighter. And I know if I ever see those eyes again, staring at me from the shadows, I won't have the chance to stop. The woods that watched. I'm 28, and I've always enjoyed hiking and camping alone. There's something about the silence of the forest, the isolation, that helps me think. In late November, I decided to take a solo weekend trip to an old state forest about 3 hours from my city. The days are short this time of year, and the nights are long and cold, but I thought I could handle it. I arrived around 4:30 p.m., just as the sun was starting to dip behind the bare trees. The trailhead was quiet, and the air smelled of wet leaves and decaying pine needles. I carried a small tent, a backpack with food, and a lantern. I wanted a simple night away from the city, nothing fancy. I set up camp near a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. By 5:30 p.m., the shadows had grown long, twisting across the forest floor. I started a small fire, the smoke curling upward, mixing with the fog rolling in from the nearby creek. The forest was silent, almost unnervingly so. No birds, no rustle of animals, just the distant hum of wind moving through the trees. Around 8 p.m., I started cooking dinner over the fire. That's when I first noticed it, a faint sound, like a footstep, coming from deeper in the woods. I froze, straining to hear. Another step, then another, slow and deliberate. My heart began to race. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other forest animal, but something about the rhythm didn't feel natural. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my meal. Around 9:15 p.m., the sound returned, closer now. I looked up from my stove and noticed movement just at the edge of the firelight. Shadows shifting unnaturally between the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the forest. Nothing. But I could feel it. Eyes watching me, unseen but present. I decided to go to bed early, hoping I was just imagining things. Around 11 p.m., I crawled into my tent, lantern casting a small circle of light. That's when I heard it again, the crunch of leaves, soft but purposeful. I froze, listening. The footsteps circled the clearing, slow, deliberate, stopping occasionally, as if waiting. Around 12:30 a.m., the wind picked up, carrying a faint whisper through the trees. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like my name, drawn out slowly, deliberately. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, the natural sounds of the forest playing tricks. But I knew it wasn't. I zipped up the tent, trying to block out the noise. Around 1:15 a.m., the footsteps returned, this time accompanied by a low scratching sound like nails dragging across bark. I could feel my pulse in my throat, each beat loud in my ears. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. The forest had swallowed any connection to the outside world. I whispered, "Who's there?" The only response was silence, then the unmistakable sound of breathing. Not my own, slow, deliberate, just beyond the edge of the tent. My stomach turned. I could smell something wet earth, decay, and something metallic. I unzipped the tent slightly, peering out. The clearing was empty, but the shadows seemed wrong, elongated, twisted, moving in ways that didn't make sense. Then I saw it, a tall, thin figure standing just beyond the trees, partially obscured by fog. Its head tilted unnaturally, like it was studying me. I froze, unable to breathe, flashlight trembling in my hands. The figure didn't move closer. It didn't need to. I could feel it observing me, its presence pressing down like a weight on my chest. The scratching returned, circling the perimeter of the clearing, accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Panic overtook me. I grabbed my backpack and ran without thinking, stumbling through roots and mud, branches whipping my face. The footsteps followed, keeping pace with me despite the rough terrain. I didn't dare look back. The whispers grew louder, urgent, almost pleading. I reached the car around 2:45 a.m., drenched, muddy, heart racing. I slammed the doors, locked them, and didn't stop driving until I reached a 24-hour diner miles away. I sat in the car for hours, shivering, listening to the rain against the windshield, hoping it had all been a nightmare. Weeks later, I returned to the forest during daylight to retrieve some belongings I had left behind. Everything seemed normal. The clearing, the trees, the fog, it was all just a forest in the sun. No sign of the figure, no footprints, nothing. But sometimes when I hike at night near other forests, I get the same feeling. That weight, that presence, as if the woods are watching, waiting. And sometimes when I hear leaves crunching just out of sight, I swear I can hear whispers calling my name. I haven't returned to that clearing at night, and I don't plan to, but the memory lingers, haunting me. I know the figure is still out there, waiting for the next person to wander into the woods, the next traveler to think they are alone. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I can feel those eyes on me, just beyond the reach of light, just outside the safety of my walls. And I wonder, if I had stayed just a little longer, would I have disappeared into the forest, joining whatever watches silently from the trees? The thought keeps me awake on cold November nights, heart pounding, listening for the faintest sound of footsteps, knowing that the woods are never empty.